break and said, hey guys, well, guess what? We've got a transfer.
He was my fraternity brother's older
Sacrifice that
brother.
the American people.
Prosperous communities have healthy environments.
Trust now. She lived in trafficking for 4 years. I really felt, for a lot of reasons, I felt for them, but I didn't have the guts to stand there.
Rear Admiral Kyle Cozad's career epitomized success in the United States Navy. A Naval Academy graduate, an esteemed aviator, numerous leadership roles and prestigious assignments, including a stint in the White House Situation Room. Then it all changed when an unusual incident left him severely injured and in a wheelchair. Challenged, but not defeated, Cozad continued on, finishing out his naval career and taking on a new role as president and CEO of the Naval Aviation Museum Foundation. And then writing a book entitled Relentless Positivity, a common veteran battling uncommon odds. We welcome Rear Admiral Kyle Cozad to Conversations. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks. I look forward to spending some time with you today, Jeff.
It's absolutely our pleasure. Let me start kind of from the beginning of your military career. What inspired you to join the Navy?
So I guess that answer is twofold, really. Number one, I played basketball in high school. And, I was looking for the opportunity to get out of Las Vegas. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and go somewhere where I could play basketball. Now, flash forward to the second part of that story. We had a neighbor who lived across the street from us, and Las Vegas is a big Air Force community. So Nellis Air Force Base is right there. And he took me to work one day. And I didn't really realize the gravitas of his position, but he was the commanding officer of an F-15 squadron. So I got to go to work with him one day and see all this stuff. And I thought, man, that is really cool. That led to just a simple flight in a single-engine Cessna 172 that another neighbor of ours had, and I said, "That's what I want to do for my living. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to be." As I went through the recruiting process, I was good, but I was not great. Worked real hard, and really, our parents buckled down on us, and life was about hard work. If you work hard, if you really put your nose to the grindstone, then you'll be able to succeed at whatever you want to do. And so I came up with the idea that, hey, service academy would be interesting. Now, being from Nevada, I really didn't have a whole lot of competition. If I would have been in San Diego or Norfolk, Virginia, it would have been a different story. But I was able to get a nomination. I was selected to both the Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy. As a typical rebellious high school teenager, my folks said, hey, it'd be great if you'd go to Colorado Springs. We'd be close. We could see a lot. That's all I needed to hear. So I said, I'm off to Annapolis, and away we went.
What were those early years in the academy like?
It was hard. I'd never been away from home before, and so you deal with homesickness. You deal with, just a ridiculously busy schedule. So as an athlete, you go through your summer, and you have a good sense of humor, and people yell at you, and you take it with a grain of salt, and that's not that tough. But you get into the school year, and so you're up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you have to memorize things as a freshman that, newspaper articles, what the menu is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you have to be conversational in those newspaper articles. So there's a lot of academic studying that goes along with being a midshipman. Then on top of that, you start classes. You go from 8 to 2 in the afternoon, and then it's over to the field house where you practice for 4 hours and you condition, and then you go back to your room and you try to study for the next day. Well, needless to say, I didn't fail miserably, but I did fail. It was probably the third semester I was there, and I had gone through a rough patch with academics. My very first grade point average after 4 weeks was a 1.4 grade point average. I wish I could tell you that was on a 2.0 scale, but it was not, and I'm probably rounding that up. But so I struggled with, just being able to try to play basketball, focus on, learning the plays, learning the system, and then going through 21 semester hours of classes.
Yeah. What's the most valuable thing you took away from the Naval Academy as you look throughout your life?
It was probably a carry-on of, the same values that my folks instilled in us. And, they always said, hey, it doesn't matter how hard things are, put your nose to the grindstone, believe in yourself, work hard, and you'll be able to achieve those things. And so in my sophomore year, my academic advisor pulled me in and he said, he's looking at my grades, and I pretty much, knew exactly what he was looking at. And he said, Midshipman Cozad, what do you see yourself doing in a few years? He said, do you think you're going to go on and play pro basketball? I said, no, I probably won't even make the varsity team here. He said, okay, that's a good assessment. He said, then you probably need to think about hanging your tennis shoes up. And so, I went through a real quick decision-making process. And you hear about Division I athletes that get injured and then they're medically retired from their sports career. Well, Kyle Cozad was academically retired from his sports career, and I was able to focus on school and really bringing the grades up because I knew that I wanted to do one thing and only one thing, and that was fly Navy airplanes. So I worked hard for the next couple of years, was able to service select and have Naval Aviation as my number 1 choice, and ended up coming down to Pensacola, Florida, about 4 months after I graduated in 1985.
What was it like when you first got in that airplane?
It's a dream come true, but I would say 25, maybe 50% of all naval aviators, you get in there, and really the only flight I'd had before that was on a commercial airliner and on that Cessna 172 that I flew in Las Vegas. And so you get in there, and there's tension. You're worried, are you going to get this right? And it's hot in the middle of the summertime. So that first flight I went up, I remember, I got airsick and a little queasy, and I was like, man, maybe this won't be the career that's in it for me. But you get through that really quickly. Your body acclimates, and it was just the most exciting thing in the world. And I remember vividly. So we did our initial flight training in El Centro, California. So we left Corpus Christi, Texas, went out there. The weather was always good. The winds were calm. The skies were blue. And I can remember that, in a matter of about 8 days, I had gone through all my basic flights. I had soloed, and next thing you know, I'm doing precision acrobatics. And I thought, wow, this is exactly what I want to do. What a genesis from start to finish. Being able to do this, and saying this is what I want to do at least for the next 8 years.
Yeah. Did you, as you think back on it, what skills make a great aviator or a great naval aviator?
It's a good question because I was not a natural aviator. Again, it was about hard work, repetition, doing things over and over again. And I always used to think about, basketball and shooting free throws. Great free throw shooters don't just go to the free throw stripe in the game. They shoot hundreds and hundreds, and it's all about muscle memory and repetition. And so, I kind of applied those same things in the airplane. But you get to the point where you've got to be able to, walk and chew gum at the same time. Right. So you've got to be able to think, you've got to be able to anticipate and understand. And I think those are the things that make great aviators, is the people who really, feel like the airplane's part of them. Right. You're part of the airplane, but you can anticipate what's going to happen next, almost like a game of chess that you're playing.
Right. Take me through the rest of your career. So how long did you actually fly?
So, non-technically, I flew for about the first 30 years of my career. Okay. I was in positions, I started off, did my very first tour up in Brunswick, Maine. I flew P-3 Orion, so I was not carrier-based, okay. But I was there right in the middle of the Cold War. So we were up in Keflavik, Iceland, tracking Soviet submarines, and I was having the time of my life. I love flying so much. I wanted to continue to fly. I went to Canada and just had, several tours where, it was kind of unusual. I stayed in the cockpit a lot longer than a lot of other people. So had an opportunity to go to Canada where I was an exchange instructor. I did a department head tour in Hawaii, did a couple instructional tours where we taught people how to fly the P-3s. We called those the Fleet Replacement Squadron. I was blessed to get selected to command my own squadron, then eventually a wing. And so I got to do a bunch of flying throughout the career. And my last flying tour was in Norfolk, Virginia, where I actually commanded the entire P-3 group. Mm-hmm. Lots of squadrons, lots of people, lots of airplanes all over the world.
And then after that, after your flying was over with, where did your military career go from there?
So yeah, there were some curveballs in there, and I got to do some really unique things. I had just got my master's degree, and I was put in a nomination package to work at the White House. Our career manager called and said, "Would you be interested in this?" And I said, "Yeah, it sounds interesting." Didn't know anything about it, so much to my amazement, went to the White House one day for an interview, and went to the West Wing, and I was interviewing for the Director of Operations at the White House Situation Room, so basement of the West Wing. And I thought, my gosh, I'm a P-3 guy. What do I know about this? Uh-huh. And so I continued through the interview process to a point. It took about 3 months. I had one interview every month, and then I got to go home and sit and wait for the phone to ring and see what's next. What do I need to know? studied everybody in the West Wing of the White House, so I knew who was who, and I could be as prepared as possible. And finally got the call that, hey, you're the guy, they want you to start next week. And I spent the next 2 years. My first year as the director of operations, so the number 2 guy in the Situation Room, and then I was selected to step up and become the senior director of the White House Situation Room in my last year.
Tell us what that's like. What are you actually doing?
So, the White House Situation Room is, a lot of people, think of a conference room and they think that's it. It's actually a series of 3 conference rooms. We've got all kinds of telephone equipment, secure telephone equipment, and then a watch floor. So we've got folks from, and these folks are young people, so 25, 26 years old from each one of the intelligence agencies. So think about all the 3-letter agencies that are out there. And they get selected, they get interviewed, they get selected, and they come and they stand watch on a rotational basis. And so my job that first year was to train them, and I approach this from a military perspective. We use the term commander's intent a lot. And basically that's, hey, here are my expectations. Here are the expectations within the job. This is what you need to do. And you're going to do that when I'm not here. You're going to do that when others aren't here. And you're going to have to make calls in the middle of the night that are difficult and challenging because, the White House Situation Room assimilates a wealth of intelligence information, open source reporting from news channels and outlets, puts those together to try to create the important story or what's important for the National Security Advisor to know. When does the president need to be notified? When does the vice president need to be notified? And so it was just a tremendous opportunity. And everything that I had done in the Navy up to that point, so I was really focused on how to train people, how to standardize, how to set expectations and hold people to standards. It was just a natural fit for that first year in developing that watch floor.
Yeah, and the second year you moved up into a senior position.
Moved up into the senior position, and so during those years, you'd set up conference rooms, you'd make sure everything was good. When the president would come down typically 2-3 times a week and hold a meeting with his National Security Council, and so you became aware, and they became aware of who you were. It was funny, I wore a suit and tie, and so until I left, President Obama was the commander-in-chief at the time, went in and got my end of tour award in the Oval Office with my wife and my son, and he said, I didn't even know you were in the military. And so, you're at an arm's length distance, but got to go up in the Oval Office a lot whenever the president would do a head of state phone call. You'd be there present, you'd get the line set up. They would actually switch the call down in the Situation Room, transfer it up to you, and then, when the president's ready to take the call, they make an introduction and away he goes. Wow. Sounds real cool, doesn't it?
It does.
Until the phone goes bzzz, and it happened more often than I wanted it to. We changed our equipment up at some point, but I can vividly remember the president, turned into me one day, and it was an exceptionally hard call to make. This head of state was in a very remote location. We had to set up, it was kind of a MacGyver adventure, set up different networks so that, they could make the call. And the call dropped about halfway through, and he looked at me and said, why is this so hard? It's just a phone call. And, I had many things spinning through my mind, and I said, yes, sir, we'll get better. But yeah, it was an incredible experience, an incredible opportunity to include, kind of being a fly on the wall in what I consider, one of the most influential missions that, our country's ever done, and that was, taking down Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, tell me about that, because that's a famous picture that so many people see.
Yeah.
And
there was the thing that I'll always remember was not just that night in that famous picture, but it was all the work and the planning and the preparation that really led up to that evening. And it was several months when I can remember John Brennan was the director for Homeland Security at the White House at the time. And he came into my office one day and said, we've got a really sensitive, briefing coming up, so we need to shut this off. We need to disable cameras. It's just the people in the room. And he said, I only want you and the director coming in. I was the director of ops at the time. He said, if there's anything to pass, just the 2 of you come in. And so we got all set up, and he said, and we've got some people from the CIA that are coming over. They've got something that they need to bring in. And so I worked with Secret Service. We got them in the back door, and they came into the large conference room in the Situation Room. and had this model, and it looked something, very much like when I was a kid. We had a big, 2x4 and plywood box that we would open up, and it had the, electric train station that sat in there, and that's really what that looked like. It was a big box. They opened it up, and it was a compound. I could tell that it was a compound. No idea where that compound was, no idea what the significance of the discussions were, but for the next several months, there would be routinely scheduled meetings, talk about the same thing, same level of sensitivity, and we got to a point where the Air Force General, and his name is Brad Webb, that was in the center seat with President Obama off to his right side the night of the raid, came in and were helping him set up communications so that they could talk to people downrange. And that's when we found out specifically that hey, we're going to go in and get Osama bin Laden. So pretty amazing time in history to be involved in that and a fly on the wall. I take no credit for any of the success, but I feel like I had a small part in enabling some of the things and decisions that happened that night.
So they were watching it on screen as it was
They
occurring.
were, and that's that.
And you were in that room.
That famous picture. I can't confirm or deny that, Jeff.
Okay.
But I was a big part of what happened that night.
Wow. What was the president like that day? I mean, I can only imagine that he had to have had so much on his shoulders. Had something gone wrong, I mean, it would have.
Yeah, he was a pretty cool cucumber because I think he played golf that morning. And so he went out and played 9 holes of golf, and then they came in the afternoon, and they had sandwiches that were brought in, and the environment felt like it was just another meeting with really high stakes.
Yeah, there was a lot riding on it for sure.
No doubt.
Talk to me a little bit about coming to Pensacola and kind of and so you're Rear Admiral, and tell me about your career here.
Yeah, so we got to Pensacola in July of 2017, and for me, I went through my initial 6 weeks, the academic portion of flight school, in 1985, at the end of 1985, and we hadn't been really back other than when my son, who graduated from the academy in 14, he got his wings out at Milton Field, South Whiting in 2016, and so that was the only time. I never really thought there was anything here for us, but I got tapped on the shoulder and was actually headed to Belgium for another joint job, and I got a phone call that, hey, we're going to change our mind and we'd like to send you to Pensacola to be the commander of Naval Education and Training Command. And so for me, that was kind of a dream job, responsible for everything in the Navy that deals with training and education, to include kind of the street to fleet process. So I was responsible for the Navy's recruiting command in Millington, Tennessee, for the Navy's training command up in Great Lakes, Illinois. So the Navy's boot camp, all the ROTC units, and then hundreds of schoolhouses around the country that do technical training, to include here in Pensacola for the aviation rates. And was able to jump into a job like that. I had a passion for it, and came in with just a different perspective to say, hey, let's think about how we could do this differently, and really innovate, really get creative, and do a better job for our sailors in training.
Yeah. And so you were living on base when the accident happened. Tell me about the accident.
We did. So we'd been here just a few months, and you hear all the time that a single moment in life can change the direction and the entire complexion. And for me, that happened on March 16th of 2018. We'd been here just about 6 months, maybe a little more than that, and it was a slip and fall accident in my house. Very steep steps. So we lived in a house that was erected in the 1830s. It was burned down during the Civil War, rebuilt, and so it had been there forever. Super steep steps, very small stairs, and a handrail that came about to my knee. So I don't have a ton of recollection, but best I can piece it. My wife, if she were here today, she'd argue and say I was wrong. Something else happened, but I think I got up about 3 steps, fell, and landed on my back. And the trauma, did damage to the point where I had 2 vertebrae that were just completely decimated, and I suffered an incomplete spinal cord injury. And I don't have a ton of memory about that night. I can remember being confused. I knew I was in shock, and really the first vivid memories I have were waking up in a hospital after about an 8-hour surgery, and really grasping the fact that I can't feel anything below my waist. I can't move my legs. I can't roll over by myself. And you want to talk about a gut punch and, kind of the soul searching. I did a whole lot of soul searching, in a very short amount of time.
Because I can only imagine, because you're essentially at the peak of your career.
I was, and I loved what I was doing. I loved serving, and quite frankly, when I was a young guy, I had every intention of doing 8 years and getting out and flying for Delta Airlines. I was a big Delta Airlines fan. Right. I knew the pay scale, I knew how long it would take me to upgrade, but I loved serving, and I loved being able to, the more senior I got, being able to influence other people's lives in a positive way. And so, I was kind of at the peak of that, being able to help and really influence Navy policy, Navy training, and thousands of sailors that fell under me. And so the doctor at the time told me, he came in and said that my wife was with him, and he said, "Hey, this is tough, but that was one of the worst surgeries I've seen." He said, the damage to your vertebrae really looked like you've been in a high-speed auto accident. And he said, unfortunately, you're never going to be able to walk again. You'll be confined to a wheelchair, and life as you know it today will change. I processed that for a couple days, and I'm a pretty pragmatic guy. I'm a big planner, and so I can remember, after all my painkillers wore off, and I became lucid enough to use an iPhone. And you think an iPhone's a dangerous thing in a kid's hands, give it to a guy who's on painkillers. And I was looking up retirement pay, because that was the first thing. I'm the breadwinner for the family. Sure. I've still got to take care of my kids. I had grown adult kids, but I still felt an obligation. Sure. I'm going to have to retire. I'm going to have to get a minivan that you can put a wheelchair in. All these thoughts, went through my mind. I was going to be medically retired, and as I thought through all those, likely events, I just came to this realization that, I can do more. I gotta find the purpose for this. I gotta process everything and get to a point where I can lay in bed and feel sorry for myself and watch ESPN for 20 hours a day, or I can find purpose in what others would call a tragic accident and figure out how to move forward and do good things with my life.
And you were able to go ahead and finish your career, huh?
I was, yeah. I'm definitely a unicorn if you come to accidents like that and outlooks like that. I went through about 8 weeks of physical therapy where I was at West Florida Hospital at the time, and I got to the point where I could stand up, I could use a walker, and today I use a walker for shorter distances. I use wheelchair. My wife and I travel all over the country. We've been to Hawaii. We went to Paris, France for our anniversary last year, and so we've really tried to just kind of raise the bar. And I can remember in physical therapy, the very first time there was a big clunky machine. It's called an Arjo. And so basically they put a waist belt on you, they put straps on your shoulders, and they hook you in. It's almost like a parachute. And there's a big mechanical, motor, and it pulls you up out of your wheelchair. And I was standing up for the first time. Between you and I had nothing to do with that. That was all the machine. But, I'm a type A personality, kind of a cocky naval aviator, and I said, "Look what I'm doing, Doc. You told me I'd never be able to do this." And that was the evening where I said, I want to stay in the Navy. I want to make them tell me no. Mm-hmm. And so, I was very persistent on how do I get back in the game. And, with that respect, there were a couple of guys. Vice Admiral Bob Burke was the Chief of Naval Personnel. He was my direct boss at the time. And Admiral Bill Moran was the Vice Chief of Naval Operations. To their credit, they saw that, hey, it's not about your mobility. It's about what you have up here. Mm-hmm. It's what you have in here. Mm-hmm. And I was able to stay on active duty, got back to a point where I'm going into work in a wheelchair. I'm traveling around the country to schoolhouses. I'm blowing up explosive ordnance down at Eglin Air Force Base from a wheelchair, and I was able to do the job for 2.5 more years before I retired.
Amazing, amazing. We've got about 4 minutes left, which leads me to your book, Relentless Positivity. Mm-hmm. What's obviously the title tells us something, but what's the real crux of the book?
So I was able to participate on the Navy's Wounded Warrior team, went to the DoD Warrior Games in 2019, and that really instilled this affinity in me that I could be a mentor. I had something, and I hated it when people said, "Hey, I understand what you're going through." Well, no, you don't. Yeah. But I was in a position where I could empathize, I could sympathize, and so I started to mentor people. And the book was really an opportunity to reach more people. And You know, if you have a chance to read it, it's got a positive message. It's about overcoming life's obstacles, and you know that obstacle for one person may be, you know, a dent on the fender, or a raise that they didn't get, or you know, a girlfriend who broke up with them, or it could be something more significant like a cancer diagnosis or an injury like mine. And so, you know, the book is really about encouraging people and, you know, not giving them the keys to success, but just kind of showing them what motivated me as I went through my recovery and, you know, to the point where I'm at today.
How do you stay positive?
So I told people there were three things that really I leaned on when I was in the hospital, and you know, still to this day. The first one was my faith. You know, my faith in God. I knew there was a purpose out there, and you know, I think He's answered what that purpose is, to get out there and tell your story and encourage people. The second one was my family. I had a tremendous family support, to include the community of Pensacola, and the third was a promise. And so I'd been in the hospital for about 4 days. My son came to see me, and he was getting ready to go on his very first deployment. And he told my wife Amy, he said, "Mom, I'm gonna see if I can stay home for a couple months and help. And you know, you're gonna need some help with Dad." She said, "Nope, you got to go." And as he was ready to leave, she said, "And when you get back, your dad's gonna walk across the ramp in Jacksonville, Florida, and give you a hug and greet you." I said, what are you talking about, lady? You just heard this doctor. He's a little smarter than we are on this type of stuff. But sure enough, there is nothing more motivating than, you know, trying to deliver a promise like that. And I did. He came home 7 months later, and we've got a picture that brings tears to my wife's eye every time she sees it. And it's me walking across the ramp with my walker to give him a hug and welcome him home.
Wow. How does someone go about getting a copy of the book?
So we sell that at the museum, and 100% of the proceeds go to the Naval Aviation Museum Foundation, where, you know, we want to tell stories about heroes. Kyle Cozad's not a hero. I'm just a normal guy, but there are lots of other stories out there. So navalaviation.com is our bookstore, and it'll give you an option. I'd love to, you know, personalize and sign that for anyone who's interested.
Wonderful. What's the next few years look like for you?
So I'll be honest with you, I've turned down a couple other jobs, you know, some very meaningful to us, and you know, we've struggled with it, but you know, my wife and I have, you know, really come to the conclusion that Pensacola is our forever home. I love the museum. We've got tons of potential now that we're reopened to the public, yeah. So you know, I think I've got 5 or 6 more years left in my gas tank, at least.
Yeah. Well, the museum is wonderful, as anyone who has ever been knows. And what a great inspiration you are. I thank you so very much for spending some time with us, and wish you all the very best.
Thank you, my friend. This has been great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Admiral. The name of the book, Relentless Positivity, Admiral Kyle Cozad. By the way, you can see this and many more of our conversations on the PBS video app and at wsre.org/conversations. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you for hanging out with us. Hope you enjoyed the program. Take great care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.